Hey, thanks for joining us for Pact. I'm the Peter Compton, the lovely Miss Astronaut Cowboy Doctor, Master of Science. Here is the ACD. Together, it's Pact. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, or your favorite podcast service. Also, leave us a glowing review on Audible and Apple Podcasts. Help us keep the lights on by becoming a patron at patreon.com/PactPod. That's PACDPOD. Your monthly support gets you into the Discord server, gets you exclusive content, and you see some content before everyone else. We've also got fantastic Pact merch available. Finally, most importantly, tell your friends. We rely so big on word of mouth. We stream 7 p.m. Eastern every Saturday. Thank you tons for tuning in. So, guys, is it worthwhile to shift the Overton window? There are a lot of people, they're like, but like we really need to bring in new people and push them left. So, all right, how do we start this?
Well, let's just start with talking about what leftism means.
Right, yeah. The idea of a left politics came out of the French Revolution. It referred to the seating arrangement in the French Estates General, which is the French Parliament, whatever you want to call it, their Congress, etc. More or less, the people who congregated on the left of the hall, the left wing of the French Parliament / French Estates, were against the monarchy. They supported creating a democratic republic. They supported secularizing. So if you think about who is actually the left wing in this situation, it is the representatives of the bourgeoisie.
And the origin of the wing as well. This is where left wing and right wing come from.
Literal wings, like as in physical space. The left and the right in a room. It's just assigning a quote-unquote revolutionary viewpoint to the left. Now, at that time, when there was an actual monarchy, that was actually revolutionary.
Right.
However, it was a revolution of the bourgeoisie. When we say left wing, we are referring to the representatives of the people who established capitalism.
And it continues to remain that way, that the right and the left, as we conceptualize it in the United States and globally in Western countries, is describing wings of capital.
Mm-hmm.
So that is how the concept of left is being applied today, which results in when that term, and of course terms change over time. We're fucking historical and dialectical materialists.
Yeah,
Marxists.
absolutely.
Those origins in a bourgeois revolution has stayed the same over time in the way that we think about politics here. So that results in what we call the left being a mixed bag of bullshit, from Joe Biden to Stalinists. And those are all the same group of people.
Well, in lots of people's eyes, anyways.
Yeah.
Legitimately speaking, not at all.
Right. Because of this conceptualization of leftism as being rooted in wings of capital, that...
Or wings of one unitary thing, at very least.
Right. That the word leftism has ambiguity in the way that people apply that label now. And because of that historical root in right and left and being wings of capital, that communism is outside of that. So with that brings the concept of the Overton window. So the Overton window is a set of theoretical boundaries that supposedly shifts over time to delineate within those boundaries what is considered politically reasonable at that space, time point, dialectically. The inventor of this did not think in dialectical terms, but his colleague described, they use this entity to describe how lobbyists and marketers could dictate what is socially acceptable, which is kind of ironic and paradoxical, because this is something that people invoke to describe an ostensibly democratic situation. Like, oh, well, this is what the people think is acceptable. But it really describes, the way that think tanks are involved in
or marketers.
Right. So there are different levels of it, but the Overton window as it was conceptualized, and this is kind of not how people apply it today, but they think of it in terms of left and right. that is not the original purpose of the Overton window. It's actually more freedom versus less freedom. And then in the middle of that is like right where we think, oh, policymaking, that's acceptable. Then it says, oh, this is plausible. Then it's sensible. Then it's, kind of sensible, kind of wishy-washy. Then it's radical, and then it's unthinkable. There might be like 6 different levels, but the further out from the center that you get in the Overton window, that is increasingly unacceptable. So the way that that's applied today and is used again in invoking like, oh, well, the democratic process in the US, this is what people think is acceptable around the center, which is the policy that's actually existing. People think having more democratic socialists, having more self-identifying leftists in positions of power, and I'm just going to talk in the context of the United States,
or even just what is acceptable to discuss in mainstream,
right,
like discourse.
Yeah, well, they think that having those figures in politics are helpful because it generates a broader theoretical boundary
Overton window
on that spectrum. It shifts the Overton window in a sense that this to the left, which again is not how the Overton window was originally conceptualized.
But the way that it's currently conceptualized, people sort of naturally apply it to that very limiting idea of politics on a spectrum between left and right.
Right, because I can't think of anything else.
Yeah. Well, that's how the propaganda places everyone. Like,
right, and that's why it's so important that Overton's colleague described this as a way that think tanks exert market ideology to shift this. But in any case, so having more leftists in the government, in Congress, whatever, what does that do in shifting the conversation left?
Or pushing someone left.
Yeah. What does that do?
A lot of people might say it gets us closer to socialism, as though socialism exists on this spectrum where all we have to do is add enough left points to keep going further and further in that linear direction.
You get Cory Bush camping on the steps of power.
Yeah.
So what Peter is alluding to is the way that this has been applied. It implies that just quantitatively pushing people left,
getting to accept more left viewpoints,
gets us closer to, and even the population accepting, socialist viewpoints or communistic goals, which, when the left and the right are set within a context of United States politics, we're strictly talking about the left and right wings of capital. Mm-hmm. Communism and socialism are outside of that. And that still matters, even if those leftist individuals co-opt socialist and communistic ideals by changing them into what they want them to be. And the final analysis of that quantitative change is just getting increasingly left. You have people thinking that they support communism and communistic and socialist ideals, but they still operate within the same material window because all they've been doing this whole time is being pushed quantitatively left, within the confines of the materialistic base.
So what is meant by that specifically is accepting lots of different left ideas as a means to add more left to you. Like, you become more left, quantitatively more left. You have more left points. You're a level 10 leftist as opposed to all those level 1 dummies.
And this also, as everything fucking does, it connects back to socialism, utopian, and scientific.
So what you end up doing is you think that seeding these ideas into enough people and trusting the process, the system as it is laid out right now, the democratic system that was established, that is much less authoritarian than feudalism, you get people thinking that if they trust that process and enough people have the right view, that socialism is just going to manifest. It's just going to happen. And that exactly, this was why I was headed to socialism, utopian, and scientific, because that is what the utopian view is. It's the idea you can propagandize or you can reason your way into a totally different economic system without addressing the system that you exist in today, without resisting the class contradictions that exist laden in the system: ownership, non-ownership, people in control, people who are not in control, rulers and subjects.
Exactly. And that brings me to the argument that shifting the Overton window and how people colloquially conceptualize it can increase class consciousness.
This is where the difference between qualitative and quantitative is most important.
Exactly. So quantitative is just like a continuous, you're adding more of something. You have one unit, you add 2, 3, 4 units, you keep going and it infinitely incremental small bits or large bits. You just keep adding on something. A qualitative shift means that there is a categorical change.
Mm-hmm.
Something is categorically different than the other. So a quantitative shift is like height in a child or weight in a child. You keep adding on inches, centimeters if you're a Brit Bonger, and or weight, pounds, kilograms, whatever. A qualitative shift would be if you are if you're like Piaget and you're thinking of like stage like change and you're moving from concrete to formal operations and development. It's like a categorically different set of circumstances. The most direct is the difference between a capitalist system and a communist one.
One of the things that happens when you think getting to communism is simply going further and further left. Eventually, we'll get to communism if we keep pushing everybody left. One of the things you start to think is that incrementalism is bad because the changes aren't big. This is an example of how understanding things quantitatively ends up screwing us because we're not really thinking in terms of what are these changes doing. The other problem with quantitative thinking is that it kind of sets up everything as a linear process.
As a linear process, and again, within the confines of capital, which was where the class consciousness comes in. The further and further left you go, if you're operating within the left-right political spectrum of society as we see it, you don't arrive at class consciousness, even if they're saying class consciousness.
Yeah.
It just because they say that doesn't mean that they're advocating for working class material interests.
Yeah, well, for all you know, it could mean something just like appearing to be very, very radical. Like class consciousness to somebody who doesn't know
anyone who identifies as a socialist in Congress who did not withhold her vote.
Or on Twitch.
Yeah.
Not every single one.
I mean, isn't
there
that
are marks.
AOC was on Twitch, right?
Yeah. But the false version of class consciousness is about resisting what aesthetically we know as capitalism. Whereas the actual class consciousness that's important to embrace is knowing the material differences that separate one classification of a type of person in society from another classification.
Owners and those who do not own.
Owners and not owners. Rulers and subjects. Understanding that is the key. And I'm sure that there's probably some way to recuperate that. I'm not going to promise that isn't. But the more you know about the actual how this works, why ownership equals power, why they have the ability to dictate culture and the norms that people interact with, why do they enforce market incentives in all social realms? Why do they do these types of things? If you have a good analysis of these things, then you're probably more likely to accept the idea of organizing collective power in actual resistance to the capital dynamic.
Yeah, you're not moving closer and closer to communism. You're changing frameworks. And you cannot do that within the left-right spectrum that the Overton window in the era, even outside of it, on the left-right spectrum that people apply it today, and even the more freedom, less freedom spectrum that it originated on, you can't achieve that within that spectrum off of which we're operating. It is a different framework. Communism and socialism and all movements that are actually working within those frameworks that are dissociated from market ideology. So yes, this does not include market socialists. Exist outside of that right-left spectrum. One, you can't even achieve the theoretical or like abstraction of communism and socialism if you move left within that window, even if you think you are, because that requires a materialist analysis. But then especially when we're talking about the Overton window and how those things are implemented in practice in the United States, that definitely does not work. And so it's not about shifting little by little or big by big. It's not about making a large shift. It's about changing the framework. It's about moving to a different spectrum that exists off of the infinite left-right spectrum that exists within the capitalist framework.
That's all for today. Thanks again for watching. This is Pact. I'm Peter. This is Miss Astronaut Cowboy Doctor. To help us out, click like, follow, subscribe, whatever. Leave us 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts and Audible. To support us, become a patron at patreon.com/PeterCoffin. Thanks so much, guys. We'll see you later.